Well, that's true. And the fact that you are connected, obviously, to Roger, and that Roger played such an important role in Steely Dan. I don't know if the average Steely Dan fan really understands. Yes, the music was really good. Yes, the playing was really good. But it's like the difference, that's all well and good, but somebody has to bridge the music, the playing to the person who listens to it on the other end. And that was Roger. Just
Mm.
nobody like him. Nobody.
I heard somebody say at one time on a comment that you had the brains of Steely Dan, but Roger was the thing powering those brains. So I thought
That's a good analogy.
isn't that an interesting way to look at it? Because yeah, he was powering it. I love that analogy. So yeah, thanks for saying that. I have gotten a lot of great feedback. There actually is excitingly all these like 20-year-old Steely Dan fans, and there's a new crop of Steely Dan fans that have really done their research and have, you know, learned about dad and his contributions, and they've been telling me about it, and I think that's actually really beautiful. So somehow the kids, I think, are going to be all right, Skunk. The kids, the kids are digging in.
Kids are going to be all right. That's a Peter Townsend quote, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, this is stuff that you've probably said a million times before, but there's been a lot of early Steely Dan stuff circling the airwaves lately. And my channel, we really love all the backstories, we love the history. So if you could just give us a synopsis about how you teamed up with Steely Dan in those early days, that would be so much fun to talk about. Do you feel good about,
Sure.
giving us that little history that you've probably said a million times, but we'd love to hear it. How'd you find these
Sure.
guys? How'd they find you?
Well, I was living in Boston. This was back in 68, 69. And I was working at a recording studio called Intermedia Sound. Uh, I wasn't the house guitar player, but I was hanging out there a lot and ended up playing on a lot of different people's records and demos and other, musical endeavors. Um, and there was a band these guys were very good friends of mine named the Bead Game.
Mhm.
And it was a gentleman named Gary Katz who was producing this band. And somehow or other, uh, I guess, obviously, because I knew, especially John Sheldon, who was a guitar player in the band, great player, um, had introduced us. And then I guess I was doing a session with someone else, and I'm trying to remember who it was, Paul Pina or Jonathan Edwards. That I can't remember.
Mhm.
And I guess Gary had stuck his head in, and afterwards we, you know, ended up, we met in the hallway of the studios, and he said, "Listen, I'm producing this a wonderful lady singer named Linda Hoover in New York. Would you be interested in playing on her project?" And I was
Mhm.
commuting back and forth. I was living in Boston, but I was commuting to New York to do sessions. Uh, and so I said, "Well, sure, no problem." And when I went down there, I met Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, who had written a good chunk of the material on Linda Hoover's record. And when I asked them about it, they said, I said, "Well, this music is really amazing." Right?
Mhm.
And they said, "Well, we've never heard anybody play this music like you do. Would you someday be interested in forming a band?" And I said, "Sure." And so we made a sort of a pact that the first person that got anything close to a record deal would alert everyone else. And what was interesting is Jimmy Hodder was the drummer for the Beat Game. And when we started to assemble what ended up becoming Steely Dan, Jimmy became the drummer because we were looking for a drummer. And David Palmer was a friend of mine. Ricky Phelps was another great guitar player. And I had met him in New York doing sessions. And so when we were looking for someone as a lead singer, I recommended Dave Palmer. And of course, you can hear him sing on this first Steely Dan record. He's a pretty amazing singer. Mm-hmm. So the band built up. Denny Diaz, the other guitar player in the band, was good friends with, I believe, both Becker and Fagan. Mm-hmm. And that kind of rounded things out. There we were. Now, we were rehearsing because Gary Katz had negotiated a publishing deal with ABC Dunhill Records. And so that was the camel's nose under the tent. I said, if the first person that gets anything close to a record deal, call everybody. Here we go. So I happened to be in California. Jimmy moved to California, and so did Dave Palmer. And we didn't really have a place to rehearse, so we started rehearsing in the office of the president of ABC Records, Jay Lasker. And usually we would rehearse at night, and then we'd clean up our stuff and get out of there before Jay showed up for work. But from what I remember, we'd had a night of celebration and libation, and didn't manage to get our equipment broken down quickly enough. And so Jay Lasker came into his office and said, "What the hell is this?" Oh, no. And we said, and Gary said, "Well, there's this band. And maybe you ought to listen to them." And Jay and Howard Stark, who was his partner, said, "Okay, we'll listen to it." And that's kind of how it all got started.
Ooh, I love it. So y'all are rehearsing. So you haven't met Dad yet, right? Or is he's around ABC at the time?
Right. He's a house engineer. He's like staff engineer. Mm-hmm. And so I remember we were all sitting around trying to figure out a name for the band. Yeah. And it really settled into two different names. One was Big Nardo in the 8th grade, but we all decided that was too long and probably couldn't fit it on an album cover. And somebody suggested Steely Dan, and because, we were all East Coast kids, we'd all gone to some fairly decent schools. I went to prep school. English literature was a strong foundation for all of us. So we had all read William Burroughs' work. We'd all read Naked Lunch. I mean, we were at Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. I mean, that whole underground author revolution there in the 60s. So someone suggested Steely Dan from William Burroughs' novel Naked Lunch. And we all went, "That's nice. Let's do that." And then the first song that we released as Steely Dan was a song called Dallas. Very cool song, very catchy, very cool song. But I'm not sure. I think it was Walter Becker that convinced Donald and the record company to pull it, because number one, since there was a lot of steel guitar, and it was kind of a country tune, as only Steely Dan can do country, but it was kind of a country tune. And I think they were worried that people would think that Steely Dan was a country band. So they pulled that. And then the first, I guess, large release was do it again. And then,
Mhm.
of course, the rest is history.
Mm.